20 years. That's how long Jim Caviezel carried the face of Jesus. The crown of thorns pressing into his skull, the lashes across his body, the final breath that left theaters around the world in stunned silence. For an entire generation, he was the passion of the Christ. But now, he's gone. October 2025. The headlines hit like a thunderclap. Caviezel out, new actor cast as Jesus. The man who gave everything to play the Son of God, replaced. How does that even happen? And more importantly, what did he actually say before he walked away? Because just 6 months earlier, in April 2025, Jim Caviezel sat down for a revealing interview. The Arroyo Grande podcast, hosted by Raymond Doyo, a California-based voice in Catholic media. Over 300,000 listeners tuned in within the first week. The episode was titled, Jim Caviezel's Spiritual Journey, the Passion and Resurrection. 1 hour and 12 minutes of raw confession. He wasn't selling a movie. He was opening a wound that never fully healed. Now I get these bonus years, he said. I had no idea. He spoke about returning to the role, about stepping back into the sandals of the resurrected Christ. There was willingness in his voice, admiration for Mel Gibson's vision. But there was also something else, a kind of sacred dread, because playing the crucifixion nearly destroyed him the first time. January 22nd, 2003, Matera, Italy. Lightning struck him during the filming of the Sermon on the Mount, struck him through the tip of an umbrella. Entertainment Weekly and CBN News confirmed it. Then it happened again, weeks later, same location. This time, assistant director Jan Michelini was hit too. Caviezel described it to 60 Minutes Australia. It felt like fire surrounding me. 2 lightning strikes on the man playing Jesus. You can't script that kind of omen. And now, 2 decades later, Mel Gibson was asking him to do it again. Not just the cross this time, the resurrection, the descent into Sheol, the breaking open of death itself. Gibson called it an acid trip, a metaphysical odyssey, $80 to $100 million in the making. Over 200 actors auditioned from Europe, Latin America, the Middle East. May to September 2025. In the end, Gibson chose a Finnish actor named Juho Otin, born 1982, known for intense psychological roles in European cinema. Films like The Unknown Soldier. Gibson wanted someone who could convey the transcendent through the eyes alone. Minimal dialogue, maximum presence. But that was later. In April, the narrative was still clear. Jim Caviezel was all in, ready to return, ready to finish what he started. If you're willing to walk with me to the end of this story, to uncover what really happened between those 2 moments, hit subscribe now. Because what comes next isn't just about Hollywood casting. It's about what happens when a man is asked to let go of the most sacred role he'll ever play. And what Caviezel said in those interviews may reveal more about resurrection than any film ever could. So what exactly did he say? What did Jim Caviezel believe about portraying the moment when death lost its power? He wasn't just accepting the role again, he was walking back into the fire. And Caviezel knew what fire meant. Back on January 22nd, 2003, in Matera, Italy, while filming the Sermon on the Mount, lightning struck him. Not through the sky, through the umbrella meant to protect him. Entertainment Weekly confirmed it. CBN News documented it. But here's what most people don't know. It happened twice. The second strike, weeks later, same location, hit both Caviezel and assistant director Jan Michelini. In his interview with 60 Minutes Australia, Caviezel described it like fire consuming him, but no serious injuries. Some called it coincidence. Others saw something else entirely. Fast forward to April 16th, 2025. Caviezel sits down with Raymond Arroyo, on the Arroyo Grande podcast. 1 hour, 12 minutes of raw confession. Over 300,000 listeners in the first week alone, and he says something striking. He's preparing again. He wants to give more of himself this time. More suffering, more obedience, more surrender. This wasn't an actor discussing a sequel. This was a man describing a vocation he couldn't escape. Meanwhile, Mel Gibson had been painting a picture of something the film industry had never attempted. In January 2025, he told First Things magazine the sequel would be an acid trip. Not his words casually thrown around. This was theological architecture, the fall of angels, the descent into Sheol, not hell, as most Americans picture it. Sheol, the Hebrew concept from the Old Testament, a shadowy realm beneath the earth where the dead waited. In Greek, it's called Hades. But here's the distinction that matters. Gehenna is the place of eternal punishment. Sheol was where the righteous waited for rescue. According to the Apostles' Creed, between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, Jesus descended to the dead. Descensus ad inferos. Not to suffer, but to liberate. Gibson based this vision on the Gospel of Nicodemus and the theological framework of Thomas Aquinas. He wasn't making fantasy. He was illustrating doctrine most Christians recite but never visualize. Then came October 2025, the announcement no one expected. Jim Caviezel would not return. Not for health reasons, not for personal conflict. The reason was painfully practical. The story picks up 3 days after the crucifixion. Caviezel, now in his mid-50s, would require extensive digital de-aging. Expensive, time-consuming, impractical. Production sources told CBN News it made more sense to cast someone who naturally fit the timeline. So on October 10th and 11th, reports confirmed it. Caviezel was out. Casting for a new Jesus was already underway in Rome. Monica Bellucci, who played Mary Magdalene, also wouldn't return. Let's pause on the timeline. April 16th. Caviezel says he's preparing to give everything again. January. Gibson describes a metaphysical masterpiece requiring full spiritual commitment. October. The role goes to someone else. Here's the tension. On one side, a man who spoke of fear, obedience, and renewal. On the other, an industry decision based on age and cost. The man who wanted to surrender more deeply was told the surrender wouldn't be needed. The contrast isn't just ironic, it's almost prophetic. Because what Caviezel said about resurrection in that April interview wasn't about production schedules or cinematic technique. It was about something far more dangerous. 4 ideas kept surfacing in his words, and they reveal how he understood the resurrection, not as a movie, but as a reckoning. Fear. That's the word Caviezel used when Raymond Doyo asked him about returning to play Christ. Not fear as panic. Fear as awe so real it burns. This wasn't some recycled Hollywood soundbite on a morning talk show. This was April 16th, 2025. A 72-minute conversation on Arroyo Grande, a Catholic podcast out of California that's been quietly building an audience since 2021. Over 300,000 people listened in the first week alone. They weren't tuning in for celebrity gossip. They came because Caviezel doesn't do small talk when it comes to Christ. He told Doyo something startling. He no longer sees performance as art first. He sees it as obedience. If God calls, you do it, even if it terrifies you, especially if it terrifies you. That fear, he said, is the only thing keeping him from turning faith into entertainment. And if you think that sounds dramatic, consider what happened the first time. January 22nd, 2003, Matera, Italy. Caviezel was on set,
filming the Sermon on the Mount. Lightning struck him directly.
Entertainment Weekly and CBN News both reported it. The bolt came through the top of a rain umbrella and hit him while cameras were rolling. He described it years later to 60 Minutes Australia, said it felt like fire wrapping around his entire body. But here's the part most people don't know. It happened twice. A few weeks later, same location, lightning struck again. This time, it hit both Caviezel and assistant director Jan Michelini. The set became a place where heaven and hell collided. He separated his shoulder carrying the cross, nearly died of hypothermia during the crucifixion scene. Each wound became something he couldn't explain in purely physical terms. He once said, "Pain is part of love," not as a slogan, as theology. When journalists asked if he'd relive that ordeal, he smiled. "Of course, how could I not?" Because for Caviezel, resurrection doesn't begin in the empty tomb. It begins in the wound. Scripture says the women at the tomb ran away in fear and great joy. Not one or the other, both. Trembling joy. That's the paradox he's trying to capture. Glory doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. You can't act that unless you've lived some version of it. The humiliation, the loss, the surrender. He echoes the Apostle Paul. If we share in his sufferings, we shall also share in his glory. And then Caviezel said something that changes everything. This film is war. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. He believes portraying Christ unleashes both grace and opposition. That invisible resistance rises when you try to depict holiness truthfully. So he prepared like a soldier. Confession, fasting, prayer, daily mass. Because the sequel Mel Gibson was planning wasn't just about an empty tomb. It was about the descent into Sheol, the battle no one sees. His full name is Juho Otin, born in Finland, 1982, a name most Americans had never heard. Yet he now carries the most iconic face in cinema history. Before Variety broke the news,
Otin was known mainly in European circles. He'd built a reputation playing psychologically intense roles. The Unknown Soldier, Nordic crime dramas, films where silence spoke louder than dialogue. But this was different. Gibson didn't stumble onto Otin by accident. Between May and September 2025, his team auditioned over 200 actors. Europe, Latin America, the Middle East. They searched for someone who could physically match the timeline. 3 days after crucifixion, the body still marked, the eyes still carrying death. But here's what most people missed. The criteria wasn't just about age or appearance. Gibson told CBN News in October something that changed the entire search. "I need someone who can show the transcendent, without words." That single line became the filter. Because resurrection isn't a monologue. It's not a speech on a mountaintop. It's a presence. Something the camera catches behind the eyes. Something audiences feel before they understand. Otin possessed that rare quality. The ability to hold stillness and let divinity show through. In his audition tape, Gibson later said, "There was a moment. Otin stared into the lens for nearly 30 seconds. No movement, no performance, just presence. And Gibson saw it. The same thing he'd seen in Caviezel 20 years earlier. Not the man, the message. But now, with youth intact, without digital manipulation, the announcement hit the internet like a shockwave. Within hours, comment sections exploded. "He's not Jesus. This is sacrilege."
"You can't replace Caviezel." The emotional reaction was instant. For 2 decades, Caviezel's face had become the visual shorthand for Christ in modern culture. His suffering was their reference point, his resurrection their hope. And now, a Finnish actor most had never seen was stepping into that sacred space. Some called it bold, others called it reckless. But Gibson saw something else.
He saw exactly what Caviezel had prophesied. Let the role outgrow the actor. Let the message eclipse the messenger. And in a strange twist, the controversy itself became proof. Because the reaction wasn't really about Otin. It was about what the role represents. A face so tied to faith that changing it feels like rewriting scripture. Yet that's precisely the tension Gibson wanted. Because if the resurrection is real, it doesn't need one man's face to carry it. It needs the truth behind the face. And Otin's task now? To bear that weight without being crushed by it. To step into a role that already belongs to history. And to show resurrection not as triumph, but as something far more mysterious. Something that begins 3 days after the world thought it was over. The man who once said, "I don't want people to see Jim Caviezel. I want them to see Jesus," got exactly what he asked for. He vanished. Not metaphorically, actually vanished from the role. And he hasn't said a word about it. As of this recording, Caviezel has remained completely silent on the recast. No statements, no cryptic social media posts, no interviews of protest. That silence may be the most Christ-like gesture of all. Meanwhile, Mel Gibson's vision has only grown more dangerous. In interviews leading up to production, Gibson described the resurrection as an acid trip through eternity. Not a simple retelling. Not 3 days compressed into 2 hours. An exploration of cosmic space, hell, Sheol, the fall of angels, the spiritual chaos between Good Friday and Easter morning. Now, Sheol isn't just another word for hell. In the original Hebrew scripture, Sheol was the underworld, a shadowy place where all the dead went, righteous and wicked alike. It wasn't punishment. It was waiting. The New Testament calls it Hades in Greek. But early Christian theology split it into 2 realms. Gehenna, the place of eternal fire, and Sheol, where the righteous awaited redemption. According to the Apostles' Creed, Christ descended into this realm, descensus ad inferos, between his death and resurrection, not to suffer, but to liberate the souls of the faithful trapped since the beginning of time. Gibson is building this sequence from texts like the Gospel of Nicodemus and the theological framework of Thomas Aquinas. He confirmed this in a January 2025 interview with First Things. He wanted the story told not through sentiment, but through mystery, a metaphysical thriller, told through divine time. And for that vision, Gibson needed a complete visual reboot. Enter Juho Otin, a Finnish actor born in 1982, known for intense psychological roles in European cinema, most notably The Unknown Soldier and several Nordic crime thrillers. From May to September 2025, Gibson's team auditioned over 200 actors from Europe, Latin America, and the Middle East. The criteria wasn't just physical resemblance. It was the ability to convey the transcendent through the eyes alone. Gibson told CBN News in October 2025, "This isn't about nostalgia. It's about revelation." And yet, Caviezel's theology aligns perfectly with Gibson's intent. His talk of fear, spiritual warfare, obedience. It mirrors the very battle Gibson plans to visualize. The man may be gone from the set, but his understanding remains woven into the script's DNA. Here's the paradox. Even sacred art is still art, bound by budgets, schedules, and technology. Icon Productions is pouring between $80 and $100 million into this film. Industrial Light and Magic is handling the visual effects. The runtime is projected at 140 minutes. It's a massive undertaking. But within those limits, faith can still speak. When the resurrection of the Christ finally releases, March and May 2027, viewers will walk into theaters carrying 20 years of expectation. They'll compare faces, voices. Those fingerprints weren't left by accident.
They were forged through months of preparation. Caviezel never expected to waste. In April 2025, he sat down with Raymond Arroyo on the Arroyo Grande podcast, a California-based show focused on Catholic faith and family. Over 100 episodes deep since 2021, not mainstream, but deeply trusted. The April 16th episode ran 1 hour and 12 minutes. Within a week, it hit over 300,000 listens, shared quietly across Christian networks who sensed something was coming. Caviezel spoke like a man already halfway back to Calvary. He wasn't memorizing lines. He wasn't experimenting with camera angles. He was training his soul. Each morning, he attended Mass. A crucifix sat on his nightstand. Wednesdays and Fridays, he fasted, a tradition as ancient as the early church. He told Arroyo his preparation this time would be completely different, quieter, deeper, sacramental. He said he wanted his body to remember discipline, because without discipline, grace can't find form. Caviezel often compared acting to athletics. You don't show up to the Olympics untrained, he laughed, and you don't show up to the resurrection without prayer. But here's the paradox. Back in 2004, during the Passion of the Christ, he had done the same. Hours of prayer before each scene. Spiritual conditioning through confession, silence, scripture, and he had suffered for it. On January 22, 2003, in Matera, Italy, lightning struck him. Not once, twice. The first time, he was filming the Sermon on the Mount. The bolt came through the rain umbrella overhead. A few weeks later, same location, it happened again. This time, assistant director Jan Michelini was struck alongside him. Caviezel described it in a 60 Minutes Australia interview. He said it felt like fire engulfing him, but somehow, no serious injury. The crew confirmed it. On-set audio captured the strike. Witnesses saw it with their own eyes. It became one of the legendary moments surrounding that film. Now, in 2025, Caviezel said something revealing. This time, it's not about suffering. It's about what comes after, about light. He felt called to learn joy the way he once learned pain, to embody resurrection not as triumph, but as transfigured peace. He reread C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters to understand how temptation distorts perspective. He turned again to St. John of the Cross, to the imitation of Christ. Those texts, he said, remind him that resurrection only means something if you first die to yourself. He told Arroyo, "If I don't crucify my ego every morning, I'll never be ready for that camera." He wasn't exaggerating. Friends described him carrying a small notebook, verses about humility, forgiveness, silence. On set, he prayed the Divine Mercy Chaplet between takes. He treated the film as liturgy, sacred, irreplaceable, eternal. And then, Gibson replaced him. But here's what most people miss. Even though Caviezel won't appear in the final film, His preparation became the template, not just for the actor who would take his place, but for what the entire project would become. When a role this sacred passes to another actor, the world naturally wonders who will embody it best. But Caviezel's answer was simple: the one who prays hardest. "If you're going to play him," he said, "talk to him first." Gibson listened. Between May and September of 2025, his team auditioned over 200 actors from across Europe, Latin America, and the Middle East. They weren't looking for star power. They were looking for someone whose eyes could carry the weight of resurrection without saying a word. That's how they found Juho Otin, a Finnish actor born in 1982, known for intense, quiet performances in films like The Unknown Soldier. Not a household name, but a face that could hold transcendence. Gibson said Otin had something rare, the ability to project the divine through silence. The same quality Caviezel carried when lightning struck him twice in Matera, Italy, back in January 2003. Once on the Sermon on the Mount, once again, weeks later, with assistant director Jan Michelini standing right beside him. Both walked away, both felt marked. Now, 2 decades later, that mantle passes forward. And in a strange, sacred symmetry, Caviezel's words have become prophetic. "I want people to see Jesus, not me." He may not have known those words would become literal. The resurrection of the Christ will now unfold through another man's face. Yet Caviezel's message still burns beneath it. Because what matters most is not who plays Christ, but whether the world can still see Christ through the art. Caviezel began his journey in 2004 as the face willing to suffer for authenticity. He ends it in 2025 as a witness who quietly stepped aside, trusting the story to continue without him. His interviews from that final year form a kind of spiritual autobiography, written in fear, obedience, pain, and surrender. He didn't speak like a celebrity. He spoke like a disciple who understood that resurrection doesn't belong to actors or studios. It belongs to God. His departure mirrors the very truth he tried to express. Resurrection always follows relinquishment. You cannot rise unless you first let go. He gave his portrayal back, his reputation back, his role back to God. And in doing so, he completed the circle of humility he began 20 years ago. He once said he feared the Lord more than he feared failure. Maybe that's why he could walk away in peace. For audiences, this ending isn't a loss, it's a lesson. Resurrection is not nostalgia for what was, but trust in what comes next. The story continues, the light remains, and faith finds new faces through which to shine. So here's the question worth sitting with. Which of Caviezel's 4 themes speaks most deeply to your understanding of resurrection today? Reverent fear, suffering turned to meaning, spiritual warfare, or surrender? Let's talk about it in the comments. This is Jesus of The Voice.